The night Dennis Caldwell grabbed his wife by the arm and dragged her across the marble floor of the Harmon Group's annual gala. In front of 400 people, cameras flashing, champagne glasses frozen midair, he was smiling. That is the part nobody could forget afterward. Not the gasp that moved through the ballroom like a slow wave. Not the way Claire's heel caught the edge of the step and she stumbled, catching herself with the kind of quiet dignity that made the moment even more painful to watch. Not the fact that he didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't even slow down. What stayed with every single person in that room was the smile on Dennis Caldwell's face. Wide, deliberate. The smile of a man who believed, with the fullest certainty his ego could carry, that he had already won every battle worth fighting. He leaned close and whispered something in her ear before releasing her arm near the side exit. Something that made Claire go completely still, shoulders dropping, eyes fixed somewhere ahead, jaw set like stone. The crowd stared. Some looked away. Some reached quietly for their phones. And not one person in that gilded Chicago ballroom understood who they had just watched being thrown out. Dear friends, welcome. If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button right now and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one and I love seeing you all. Like this video, share it with someone who loves a powerful story, and let's get into this together. Now back to Claire. For years before that night, Claire Weston married Dennis Caldwell at a small ceremony in Naperville, Illinois, on a Saturday in October when the maples were burning red and gold along the riverbank. She was 38. He was 42. She wore a simple ivory dress with no train, no veil, just a single white orchid pinned above her ear. People who knew Claire described her the same way, always composed, thoughtful, a woman who chose her words like she was spending something she couldn't replace. She laughed quietly, listened with her full attention, and never raised her voice in an argument. She had the kind of stillness that people sometimes mistook for weakness, which was a mistake that would eventually cost those people everything. She had met Dennis at a business conference in downtown Chicago 2 years earlier, where he was giving a panel talk about corporate leadership. He was magnetic that evening, persuasive in the way people are when they've practiced at it for long enough that it starts to look like something real. Dennis Caldwell was the kind of man who entered a room and immediately calculated where the power was sitting. He had a firm handshake, a memory for names, a laugh that arrived right on cue, and an ambition he wore like cologne, ever present, just slightly too strong. He had spent 15 years climbing through the finance and corporate consulting world, moving from firm to firm with the ease of a man who knew how to make himself indispensable just long enough to extract what he needed before moving on. He was smart, not brilliant, but sharp enough to surround himself with brilliant people and take careful credit for what they produced. When Harmon Group headhunted him 3 years into his marriage to Clare and offered him the CEO position, he accepted before they finished the sentence. He told Clare that night over dinner, already rehearsing the story of how he had built it. She listened, cut her steak carefully, nodded in the right places, and said nothing about the fact that she already knew exactly what Harmon Group was worth, down to the decimal point. Claire was not a woman who volunteered information about herself. That was the thing people noticed and forgot in the same moment, because she had a gift for redirecting attention so smoothly that you never noticed the pivot. She had grown up in Evanston, the daughter of a second-generation entrepreneur who believed that money was only real if it was working. Her father taught her 2 things before she was 14, how to read a balance sheet and how to never let anyone see the full picture of what you held. After her father died when she was 26, Claire took the inheritance, modest by most standards, and over the next 12 years, built something that would have made headlines if she had ever allowed her name near any of them. She structured it deliberately, quietly, through a trust under the name C.H. Weston Enterprises. She hired people who were loyal, signed agreements that were airtight, and never once appeared at a ribbon cutting. By the time she met Dennis, Harmon Group had existed for 4 years. She owned it entirely. The red flags were there. They are always there, if you are willing to look directly at them instead of explaining them away. Dennis had a habit of correcting Clare in public, small corrections, the kind that carried just enough condescension to sting, but not enough to name openly. He spoke over her in conversations with friends, and when she finally finished a thought, he would look at the other person as if to say, "Wasn't that adorable?" He grew irritated when she declined to attend his work events, though he never asked what she did with her time on those evenings, because he was not particularly curious about her life as long as it didn't inconvenience his. He called her smart the way men sometimes do when they mean manageable. Clare saw these things clearly. She had seen them early, but she had also chosen him with her eyes open, which is the part that made it sting differently when it all unraveled. Not that she had been blindsided, but that she had genuinely hoped she was wrong. Harmon Group was not just successful. It was the kind of institution that people in Chicago's financial world reference the way you reference weather. Simply a condition of the environment. Headquartered in a steel and glass tower on South Wacker Drive, it managed private equity, real estate portfolios, and corporate restructuring across 11 states. Revenues cleared $400 million annually. Dennis, as CEO, earned a salary that made him feel like an architect. He made decisions, expanded divisions, hired and fired vice presidents, charmed clients at dinners, and flew first class to New York every other week. He believed, completely and without a single moment of doubt, that Harmon Group existed because of men like him. The board deferred to him. His team admired him. His PA protected his calendar like it was a national security concern. The only person in his orbit who did not treat him like the center of a solar system was his wife. And he had decided, quietly, that this was a problem he intended to solve. Her name was Renee. She was 34, worked in client relations at a firm that contracted with Harmon, and had been in Dennis's orbit for 8 months before she became something more than professional. Clare did not discover this the way people do in films, through a text message left open on a countertop or lipstick on a collar. She found it the way she found most things, through patience and precision. She noticed the shift in Dennis's behavior, the late meetings that didn't appear on his shared calendar, the way he showered immediately when he came home on certain evenings, the slightly altered version of himself he was performing, more relaxed, lighter, the way people are when they're getting something they want outside the walls of their regular life. She hired no one. She asked nothing. She simply watched, and what she watched told her everything she needed, and she filed it away the way she filed everything else, quietly, completely, and without panic. The annual Harmon Group Gala was the event of the year for the firm. Black tie, the entire board present, major clients flown in, press invitations sent to Chicago's business journalists. Dennis had always brought Clare as his wife, standing beside him in photographs, quiet and elegant, the kind of partner who elevated a man's presentation without distracting from his center frame. This year, 3 weeks before the event, Dennis sat across from Clare at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning and told her, not asked, told, that she would not be attending the gala. He framed it around her comfort, said the event had become particularly intense this cycle, that there would be a great deal of client entertainment she would find tedious, that he thought she would be happier at home. Clare set her coffee cup down. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "All right, Dennis." And he nodded, satisfied, and went back to his newspaper, not noticing the thing that had shifted behind her eyes. She went anyway. She dressed without haste on the evening of the gala, choosing a deep navy gown she had owned for years. Understated, perfectly fitted, the kind of garment that required no jewelry to be complete. She arrived at the Marriott Marquis on South Michigan Avenue 40 minutes after the event began, slipping through the crowd the way she always moved, quietly, purposefully, taking up no more space than she chose to. She spotted Dennis within 2 minutes. He was at the center of a group near the bar, laughing with that particular volume he reserved for when the people around him mattered to his standing. Renee stood beside him, close, not beside him the way colleagues stand, but the way people stand when they have stopped pretending. Dennis's arm moved to the small of Renee's back. Claire watched this from 12 feet away. She did not gasp. She did not reach for her phone. She simply stood there, still as water, and let the last quiet hope she had been privately carrying finally go. He saw her when Renee turned to speak to someone else, and the sight line opened. The smile dropped off his face so fast it was almost comical. Claire watched his jaw tighten, watched him recalibrate in real time, the calculation in his eyes moving from surprise to irritation to decision within 3 seconds. He excused himself from the group and crossed the floor toward her with the controlled walk of a man who is furious and managing it. He reached her, took her arm, not a husband greeting a wife, but a grip, and leaned close. "I told you not to come," he said, his voice low and smooth and absolutely cold. Claire looked at him without blinking. "I know," she said. Just that. What happened next took less than 30 seconds and changed everything that followed. Dennis Caldwell, CEO of Harmon Group, turned and walked fast, pulling his wife by the arm across the marble floor of his own company's gala, past board members, past clients, past journalists, past the entire apparatus of his carefully constructed world. She stumbled once. He did not stop. The room went quiet in stages, the way sound dies down when something genuinely wrong is happening and the brain hasn't yet decided what category to place it in. Victor Hale, the CFO, set his glass down slowly and watched. Margaret Dean, the company's senior legal counsel, stood near the far wall and felt something cold move through her chest. Not because she was surprised, but because she was the only person in that room, besides Clare, who understood what Dennis Caldwell had just done to himself. He released Claire's arm near a side hallway door, leaned in one final time, and said something in a voice that didn't carry beyond the two of them. Claire's face stayed composed, controlled, but her hands, hanging at her sides, had closed into fists so tight the knuckles had gone white. Dennis straightened his jacket, turned, and walked back into the ballroom, smile already rebuilding itself. He raised his glass to a nearby client. The room exhaled, and Claire Weston stood alone in a side corridor of a building she owned and allowed herself, for exactly 1 minute, to feel the full weight of it. She did not go home and cry, though she would have had every right to. She walked to the hotel bar on the lobby level, sat at the corner stool, ordered sparkling water with lime, and called Margaret. The call lasted 9 minutes. When it was over, Claire set the phone on the bar and looked at her own reflection in the mirrored backsplash behind the bottles. She looked at herself a long time. The navy dress, the composed face, the woman she had built herself into over decades of silence and precision and strategic invisibility. She had spent 12 years ensuring that Harmon Group would survive anything. Any market shift, any personnel failure, any structural weakness. She had stress-tested every conceivable threat to the institution. She had not, it turned out, stress-tested her own marriage carefully enough. But that was a miscalculation she was not going to make twice. She finished her water, left a 20 on the bar, and walked out of the hotel into the Chicago night with the kind of calm that doesn't come from peace. It comes from decision. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment right now with the words, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this story, because what happens next is going to change everything. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. Now let's keep going. Margaret Dean had been Claire's friend for 22 years and her attorney for 14 of them. She was one of 4 people alive who knew the full legal structure of C.H. Weston Enterprises, the entity that, through a series of holding companies and trust arrangements, held 100% of Harmon Group's founding shares. When Clare had originally structured the ownership, she had done it for reasons that were purely practical at the time. She wanted to operate without her name creating noise, without her gender becoming a distraction in rooms where it always had been. She had watched her father navigate those rooms his entire life, and she had chosen a different strategy. She would build something that spoke for itself, and she would remain outside the frame entirely. The irony was not lost on her now, that she had spent a decade making herself invisible inside the very company her husband believed he ran. As she sat across from Margaret in her attorney's office on a Tuesday morning and said, simply, "It's time." The process that followed was not dramatic. It was, in fact, the opposite of dramatic. It was paperwork and legal filings and a sequence of carefully worded communications, which is the way real power has always moved when it knows exactly what it is doing. Margaret drafted a formal notification to Harmon Group's board of directors from C.H. Weston Enterprises, advising that the founding shareholder was invoking her rights under the original incorporation agreement to request a mandatory emergency board session. The letter referenced 17 specific clauses of the company's founding charter, clauses that predated Dennis Caldwell's appointment by a decade. It was signed simply, Clare H. Weston, Principal, C.H. Weston Enterprises. The notification arrived in the inboxes of all 7 board members on a Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. By 9:15, 3 of them had called Victor Hale. By 9:30, Victor was standing at his office window staring at his screen with the particular stillness of a man who has just realized the ground beneath him is not where he thought it was. Dennis was in a client breakfast meeting when his phone began to vibrate with the kind of frequency that breaks through even a room you've decided to stay present in. He excused himself at 9:47 and found 6 missed calls, 2 from Victor, 1 from a board member named Frank Aldrich, 1 from the company's external legal team, and 2 from numbers he didn't recognize. He called Victor first. Victor answered on the first ring. The silence on the line before Victor spoke was less than 2 seconds, but it was the kind of silence that has texture. "There's a board notification," Victor said carefully. "From the founding shareholder." Dennis laughed. "What founding shareholder?" "I know our cap table, Victor." Another pause. "Apparently not all of it," Victor said. Dennis was already moving toward his car. The client breakfast sat half-finished on the table behind him, and he did not go back for his jacket. For the first time in 4 years as CEO, Dennis Caldwell was walking fast and not in the direction of something he wanted. The emergency board session was scheduled for the following Monday at Harmon Group's headquarters. Dennis spent the intervening days trying to dismantle what he didn't yet fully understand. He had the company's legal team pull every document in the corporate structure. He called Frank Aldrich 3 times, and each time Frank spoke in the careful, measured tone of a man who had already read things and was not sure which side of history he wanted to be standing on when the dust settled. Dennis still believed walking into that boardroom on Monday morning in his best charcoal suit, that this was something he could control. He believed this because he had never once in his professional life entered a room he was not the most powerful person in. He believed this so completely that when he pushed open the boardroom door and saw Clare seated at the head of the conference table, the chair that was his chair, in the company he ran, in the building on South Wacker Drive that had his framed photograph in the lobby, his mind refused it. He actually stopped walking. She was dressed in a pale gray suit. No jewelry except small pearl earrings. Her hair was pulled back simply. In front of her was a leather folder and a glass of water. She did not look up when he entered. The 7 board members were seated along both sides of the table, some of them with the careful blankness of people who have been told something they are still processing, others with the very slightest forward lean of people who are genuinely curious what happens next. Margaret sat to Clare's left, a man Dennis didn't recognize, who he would later learn was the lead attorney from C.H. Weston Enterprises legal firm in Wilmington, Delaware, sat to her right. Dennis found his usual chair at the far end of the table and sat down slowly, because his legs made the decision before his mind caught up. He looked at Clare. She met his eyes across the full length of the table. Still, composed. The same face she had worn in the side corridor of the Marriott Marquis a week and a half ago, when he had left her standing alone. Margaret opened the session with the kind of procedural clarity that makes people nervous, because when attorneys speak that precisely, it is because every word has been chosen to close every possible escape route. She introduced the founding documentation of Harmon Group, established in 2009 under a Delaware charter, with C.H. Weston Enterprises named as the sole founding shareholder and ultimate beneficial owner. She outlined the trust structure, the holding company arrangement, the rights reserved under the original incorporation agreement, and the specific clauses governing executive appointment and removal. She placed physical copies of the documentation in front of each board member. Dennis received his copy last. He looked at the top page, at the founding date, at his wife's initials at the bottom of the original articles of incorporation. He flipped to the second page, then back to the first. His face did not change, because some realizations are too large for the face to process in real time. They have to be absorbed somewhere deeper, and that takes longer. "You have to be kidding me," he said finally. It came out quieter than he intended. Claire looked at him. "No," she said. "Just that. One word, the same way she always spoke when she had made a decision completely." Dennis looked around the table, at Frank Aldrich, at Victor, at the faces of 7 people who had deferred to him through 4 years of quarterly reports and strategy meetings and company retreats. He saw in some of those faces what he hadn't seen there before, not allegiance, but calculation. The recalculation of men who were determining, in real time, where their professional loyalty should now be directed. "This is my company," Dennis said louder now. Frank Aldrich cleared his throat. "Dennis," he said gently, in the tone of a man who has read 17 clauses and understood their implications. According to the founding documentation, it never was. The room was very quiet after that. The kind of quiet that isn't empty. It's full of the specific weight of a man understanding, all at once, the true dimensions of the world he has been living in. What followed was not a prolonged legal battle, though Dennis tried to make it one. His attorney found nothing to work with. The documentation was airtight in the way that only something prepared years in advance with total patience and superior legal counsel can be. Every structure was clean. Every filing was legitimate. Every clause was enforceable. Dennis had been CEO of Harmon Group for 4 years, appointed, as the board now understood, by a board that itself had been constituted under rules set by an owner who had simply chosen not to declare herself. The vote to accept the founding shareholders' request for executive review, a polite phrase for the removal of a chief executive, was not unanimous. 2 members abstained. 5 voted in favor. Dennis sat still through the reading of the vote. Somewhere in the preceding 3 years of marriage, he might have imagined many versions of a confrontation with Clare. He had not imagined this one. He had not imagined her at the head of a table he thought was his, dismantling an empire he thought he owned, with 17 pages of paperwork and a single attorney. Security did not escort him out. That detail mattered to Clare, and she had specified it. He was asked, professionally, by Margaret, to return his security credentials, his company devices, and his parking access card before leaving the building. He did these things without a word. He stood at the elevator with a box that a junior administrator had quietly brought, a box containing the personal items from his office, the framed photographs, the signed baseball, the award plaques from his years in the industry. The elevator doors opened. He stepped in. He did not look back at the building as he crossed the lobby. But one of the front desk staff later told someone that when the elevator doors opened at the lobby level, Dennis Caldwell stood inside for a moment before stepping out, and that his face in that moment looked like a man trying to remember how to be a person in a world whose rules had just been rewritten entirely. People asked, in the weeks that followed, colleagues, journalists, the mutual friends that every divorcing couple splits like a shared bookshelf, whether Clare had planned all of this from the beginning. Whether she had married Dennis knowing one day she would dismantle him inside the walls of the company she owned. The honest answer was more complicated and less satisfying than people wanted it to be. She had not married Dennis as a strategy. She had married him because she had been lonely in the specific way that people with great private power sometimes are, carrying something too large to share with anyone who hasn't earned the whole truth of you. She had hoped he was a man who could eventually handle the full picture of who she was. She had been wrong. What she had planned was not the revenge. What she had planned was the structure, the clean, protected legal architecture of something she built. And what she had done on that Monday morning was simply use it. Dennis filed for divorce 3 weeks after the board session. His attorney tried to argue that assets accrued during the marriage, including Clare's stake in Harmon Group, were subject to marital property claims. Margaret filed a response within 48 hours that was, by all accounts, the kind of legal document that other attorneys asked to read purely for structure. The marital property claim was dismissed. Clare's prenuptial agreement, which Dennis had signed 4 years ago on a Saturday afternoon without reading it as thoroughly as he should have, because he had been confident in the way men who underestimate women's paperwork often are, was fully enforceable. He received what the agreement specified: the house on Elm Street they'd shared, which was in Clare's name; his car, which was in his personal savings, which were substantial. What he did not receive was any part of Harmon Group. What he did not receive was any piece of the company he had told people at dinners and galas and conference panels for 4 years that he had built. Renee left him 6 weeks after the board session. This was the part that Dennis apparently didn't see coming, though most people who heard the story understood it immediately. Renee had been drawn, in the way that people sometimes are, to the presence of a man at the center of something, the access, the confidence, the gravitational pull of someone who commands a room. When the room dissolved, when Dennis Caldwell was no longer CEO of Harmon Group, no longer the center of anything, what remained was simply a man in his mid-40s with a severance package, a rented apartment in Lincoln Park, and a reputation in Chicago's financial world that had developed a very specific kind of crack. Not a ruin, not a scandal, just a crack, the kind that people notice when the light hits at the right angle, and then remember always afterward. Clare did not return to Harmon Group as CEO. She appointed an interim executive from the company's leadership team, a woman named Patricia who had been deputy CEO for 3 years and had been, by every measurable internal metric, the most effective operational mind in the building. Clare stayed in the role she had always occupied, the principal, the owner, present in the decisions that mattered, invisible to the public and the press, which was exactly as she had designed it from the first day. She did, however, make one change to the executive suite. The framed photograph of Dennis Caldwell that had hung in the lobby, the one that greeted every client and employee who walked through the glass doors on South Wacker Drive, was taken down on a Tuesday, quietly, by the same facilities team that had once hung it. Nobody sent a memo. Nobody made an announcement. It simply came down, and the wall behind it was clean. She moved out of the Naperville house and bought a smaller place in Hyde Park, near the lake, with a back porch that looked out over the water in the early morning. She resumed routines she had let slide during the marriage: long walks, the financial journals she used to read over coffee, Sunday phone calls with an old college friend she had gradually lost contact with. She was not happy the way people imagine happiness when they think about justice being served. There was no triumphal clarity, no sense of the world snapping back into perfect alignment. There was something quieter and more honest, a recognition that she had been tested, that she had survived it, and that she was still, fundamentally, herself. Some mornings she stood on the back porch with her coffee and looked at the lake and thought about the question she had asked herself standing in the corridor of the Marriott Marquis. Not what to do, but who she was going to be when she did it. She had answered it correctly. That was enough. The people who had been in that ballroom on the night of the gala, the 400 guests who had watched Dennis Caldwell drag his wife across a marble floor and smile doing it, would not have recognized what the following months meant without the context. But the ones who connected the events, the gala, the resignation, the headlines about Harmon Group's leadership transition, the quiet divorce, the emergence of C.H. Weston as the company's disclosed principal. Those people understood something they would repeat, in different versions, for years. That a woman had walked into a building she owned on an evening when her husband intended to humiliate her in front of everything he believed was his, and had absorbed it, had stood still inside it, had not corrected him in the moment, had not caused a scene, had not appealed to the crowd for sympathy. She had simply stood in that corridor and remembered, in the specific way that only someone with total clarity can, exactly what she was standing on. And then she had gone home and made one phone call. There is something that doesn't translate in the version of this story told as gossip. The version where Clare is simply a wronged woman getting even with a faithless husband. That framing is too small for what actually happened. Because Clare did not set out to punish Dennis for the affair. She had seen the affair coming from a distance and had made her peace with what it told her about him. What she did not forgive, and what she did not let pass, was the moment in the ballroom, not the grip on her arm, though that was what the witnesses remembered. What she could not forgive was the smile. The decision to humiliate her publicly, in front of her employees, in front of the board of the company she built, with the specific intention of making her feel small inside something that was entirely hers. That was the line. Not because her pride demanded it, but because she understood, better than almost anyone, what it costs a person to let something like that go unanswered. She was her father's daughter, and she had learned that some lessons need to be taught completely, or they teach nothing at all. Dennis Caldwell moved to Indianapolis 18 months after the divorce. He took a COO position at a mid-sized consulting firm. He was good at his job. He would probably always be good at his job, because competence doesn't dissolve with humiliation, it just changes rooms. He did not give interviews. He did not appear on panels. He did not, from what anyone could tell, speak publicly about Harmon Group or about Clare. And on whatever evenings he came home to his apartment in Indianapolis, to whatever version of a life he was constructing in the aftermath of everything, no one could say with certainty what he thought about when the room was quiet. Whether he thought about her, whether he replayed that Monday morning in the boardroom, whether he understood, fully, completely, without defense, what he had done and what it had cost him. That was between him and whatever silence he lived in now. Some things aren't witnessed. They are simply carried. Clare Weston turned 45 the spring after the divorce. She had a small dinner at her house in Hyde Park. 6 people, the friends who had stayed through everything, the ones who had known her long enough to understand who she had always been beneath the composure. Margaret was there. There was wine and food and laughter that didn't need to be performed. At some point in the evening, someone made a toast and called her brave, and she shook her head gently and said that wasn't quite the right word. Brave implied fear overcome. What she had done, she said, was simply remember what she was standing on when someone tried to make her forget it. She refilled her glass. She looked around the table at the faces of people who knew her, actually knew her, and something that had been held tight in her chest for 4 years quietly released. Outside, through the back door left open to the warm spring air, the lake was dark and vast, and entirely unbothered by anything that had happened. The way water always is. The way certain women always have been, if you are paying close enough attention. And that, friends, is the story of a woman who never raised her voice, never chased chaos, and never needed anyone to fight her battles. She simply remembered who she was, and that was enough. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment below and tell me the one moment that got you the most. I want to know. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you are not yet subscribed, do it now and ring that bell, because our next story is coming, and it hits just as hard. I will see you there.